Well, Happy New Year, everybody. What a great way to end the year over the last few weeks. And we're excited for this coming season of Bethany, the life of Bethany. And we're thrilled that you're with us and joining us. Today, if you're here for the first time, it's a good day to be here because we're starting out this new series. And most of you have heard this already, but you've heard that the church is a body. That the church is the body of Christ, and you might think, oh, that's interesting, that's kind of weird. What do you mean the church is the body? And this is important to understand because it's one of the most beautiful things, one of the most mystical realities that our faith brings with it, that we all belong to. And what it means is we're part of the spiritual body of Jesus. That is, that we are ambassadors for Christ here on earth, that we are Christ's representatives here on earth. So while Bethany has a physical address, it has walls, and it has a campus, the church with a capital C, the universal church, is wherever you go. That the church goes wherever you go. And with that comes an awesome opportunity, but also some incredible responsibility when it comes to representing Christ in this world. And because what is true of Jesus should be true of his body. In other words, what was true of how Jesus loved, what was true of what Jesus deemed important, and what was true of what Jesus prioritized in his life, what was true about Jesus should be true of his body, which is to say, it should be reflected in how I live and how I love and how I prioritize. Same with you, of how you live and love and prioritize. And when it's not, that when we get this wrong as a church or individually, when we as a body of believers fail to represent what is true of Jesus, the church, and you can see this historically, and you can see this today, that when we get this wrong, the church does more harm than good. And when we get this wrong, the church gets a reputation for all the wrong reasons. And when we get this wrong, when we fail to accurately represent who Jesus is as representatives in the world or to the world, maybe the most important part of this is that we miss out on the opportunity to play a part in the story that God is writing with your life, my life, and our life. But when we get it right, when what is true of Jesus is true of his body individually, corporally, we unleash the kind of good that marks this world in such a deep way that it changes the trajectory of our communities, of our families, of our country, of our world. When we unleash this good, we unleash the beauty of his kingdom and the good news of the gospel. When we get this right, we release the goodness that shows everybody the goodness of his way. Now, here's why that's important. Because right now, when you take a look at the state of things, the reputation of the church in North America is lower statistically than it has ever been. Only 36% of Americans have any trust in any kind of religious institution, and that includes a local church. Christians today, by and large, generally speaking, are known, our reputation is known as judgmental, mean, ignorant, small-minded, and for many of you, some of you here today, you're hesitant to go all the way in your faith because you have known Christians and you have thought to yourself, if I have to go all the way, if I have to be like them, then I don't know whether I want to go all the way with Jesus. In fact, the problem, as I see it today, is this, that Christians are generally defined by what we are against rather than what we are for. And that is heartbreaking. But this isn't about pointing fingers today. This is about what happens when you and I become aligned and start becoming the solution. In fact, I believe is as phenomenal and what a privilege it is to be able to serve here at Bethany. I think the potential for us only grows exponentially when we take up our fellowship and we follow Christ, because you have the power and the authority to illuminate the glory of Jesus. You have the power and authority to illuminate the goodness of the gospel, which is to say that you have the power and authority to affect this world, your world around you, in a way that has eternal significance, because your potential is so off the charts, and that's for one reason, because the heart and way of Jesus is really that good. And it's rare to see it today. And what I want to talk about today is why the way of Jesus, the ethic of Jesus, why it's so good, and what happens when we live into our potential in our following. Now, we have to remember where we come from. Remember, in the first few centuries after the resurrection of Jesus, Christians historically were not known by what they were against. They were known because of the ethic of Jesus commanded them. They were known for who they were for. I mean, they flipped the world upside down and because of who they were for, because in their following, they did it. They literally changed the world because of who they chose to be for. And today, as we begin this new year, we can begin to unleash our potential to do good in the way of Jesus, because there's a direct relationship between following in the way of Jesus and good being done in the world. And when we align what we believe with our actions, there's a flourishing of relationships, there's a flourishing of community, of workplaces, there's a flourishing. When believers follow, the marginalized are taken care of. Those who are overlooked are seen and heard and loved. And when believers follow, flourishing follows, because, again, the ethic of Jesus is that good. Now, this ethic that Jesus introduced was so radical when he first introduced it. And when I think of the word radical, I think of usually something that's the opposite of what I believe. Like maybe I believe somebody, but somebody believes something that's so radical, I can't possibly go there. So there's this negative connotation with radical. We think somebody radical left or radical right. But have you ever thought about radical in the positive sense? Because that's what happened when Jesus walked onto the pages of history and introduced this radical ethic. It was so radical in the positive that it continues to be felt today. And I want to give you an example of how maybe it's affected you after we talk through this passage. So here's one of the most radical aspects of Jesus' ethic that we just read in chapter 6 of Luke. Let's go back through it again. Jesus said, "But to you who are willing to listen, I say, love your enemies." Now, you've heard this before, and you might have said to yourself, well, yeah, I guess that's a really good idea for people who have enemies. I don't think I have enemies, so I don't know, maybe this isn't relevant to me. Hold on, because Jesus qualified this a little more. He's continued, do good to those who hate you. Oh, okay. Well, maybe I don't know about that. I mean, I can do good, Jesus. I can do good to my neighbor. I can help out and bring some food. I can volunteer at church. I can do some good, but I don't really like thinking about people who hate me. I don't even want to think about them. And you're telling me to do good? I don't know. This seems really radical. Jesus says, well, that's what it means to love your enemies. He goes on, verse 28, bless those who curse you, pray for those who hurt you. And now this word bless means to ask God to confer spiritual and or physical blessing upon those. And in this case, on those who hurt you or curse you. Wait a minute, Jesus, you mean I'm not supposed to strategically figure out how to get back to them in a subtle way that nobody notices? I mean, wait a minute, Jesus, The people who hurt me, the people who curse me, I don't even know if I know them, but if I know the people who have hurt me, and you're trying to tell me I'm supposed to bless the people who hurt me rather than getting back at them or retaliating against them, but rather to pray for them. I'm lucky if I pray for the people I love, let alone the people that hate me. See, this is so radical. Nobody was teaching this at the time of Jesus. Nobody was talking about this. And if we're honest, nobody's really teaching it today. But Jesus isn't done here. Now he's twisting it a little bit. Verse 29, if someone slaps you on one cheek, offer the other cheek also. If someone demands your coat, offer your shirt also. I love how one commentator spun this in such a way, and listen to how he explained this. He said, it's like Jesus is saying this. If a robber is generous enough to only take the overcoat, outdo his generosity by giving him the shirt under it as well. What? That suddenly an act of evil is turned into an act of charity. He says, this is what it looks like to love your enemies. He goes on, verse 30, give to anyone who asks. And when things are taken away from you, don't try to get them back. Now keep in mind, in the first century Roman world, sympathy for the poor and caring for the disadvantaged didn't happen. It wasn't a thing. You didn't care for the poor. The poor just slowed you down. The poor just slowed society down. They were less than human. At its best, giving was done as a kind of a quid pro quo, where I'm going to give. Maybe it happened in between those of the more elite class, where they would give to their neighbor, knowing that their neighbor in turn was expected to give back. Or maybe it was a superior giving to those who were under them, knowing that they in turn would be indebted to them and they would in turn have to pay them back. So it wasn't charity, it was more transactional. Like, there's no context during Jesus' time where let me give because I love with no strings attached. It simply didn't exist. So this all would be insane. Jesus goes on, I want you to do to others as you would like them to do to you. If you love only those who love you, why should you get credit for that? Even sinners love those who love them. Now remember, Jesus here is speaking mostly to religious leaders of the day. And so he's like, hey, you love those who love you, and you want a pat on the back for that? Well, there's nothing distinct about that. The world does that. Everybody does that. And if you, verse 33, if you do good only to those who do good to you, why should you get credit? Like, you want a medal for that too? Even sinners do that much. Again, there's nothing distinct about that. 34, and if you lend money only to those who can repay you, why should you get credit? Even sinners will lend to other sinners for a full return. Again, there's nothing different about that. There's nothing distinct about that. Jesus' mission here, remember, is not to condemn the world, not to condemn you and me, but rather he wanted to change the world. That is, save the world, but through changing the world and transforming the world. So he didn't teach, hey, you got to be a little bit better. Rather, he taught, I'm calling you to do something that is so unnatural for you that you're going to have to fully rely on me and trust me if you're going to follow through on this call on your life to be my representatives in this world, because transformation of this world, you may not realize it is going to happen through you, but it's going to happen because you're going to choose not to be a little bit better, a little bit kinder, or a little bit more patient, but rather because you're going to do something so unnatural. They're going to need to rely on my strength and you're going to have to rely and trust me with the things that feel so unnatural that it's going to create space in you for me to move in and through you, because I want to transform the world. I'm not trying to condemn the world. I'm going to change it back into a kingdom it once was before the fall. So he didn't teach be better. He says, I want you to love and lend without expecting anything in return, something that comes utterly unnatural to you. True charity with no strings, so that you unleash the good of my way to all people. Then he goes on. This might be the most controversial. Then your reward from heaven will be very great. And you will truly be acting as children of the Most High, for he is kind to those who are unthankful and wicked. You must be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. Compassion is an inward disposition of the heart that leads to helping another or serving another, of being charitable. It's not just a sentiment. It's not just a feeling, but it moves you to action that has no bounds. So Jesus, if we're called to love our enemy, who are we to exclude? No one. Now, historically speaking, the church has not always gotten this right, have they? The church has not always reflected this ethic well. But when you follow Jesus, there's a self-correcting mechanism that is built into his ecclesia, into his movement, into his church. Because the church, throughout history, has self-corrected and continues to do so today. But there have been moments when the earliest Christians in their following introduced so much good that it's still impacting each and every one of you sitting in this room today and watching online. I want to give you one example of that. Take this guy, Basil the Great. Some people call him Basil. You can call him that if you want. I like Basil because it reminds me of pizza. So let's go with Basil. Basil of Caesarea, he lived in what is modern-day central Turkey around the 4th century, 370 AD. He was a bishop, and there was one thing that was true in his day that is really hard for us to imagine. In the 4th century, there was no such thing as medical care that was available to everybody. It literally did not exist. It's hard for us to grasp that because there's an urgent care on every corner these days, it seems. But in the early centuries after Jesus, the only people who could get medical care were the elite of the elite and Roman soldiers, and that's it. So Basil, he wanted to do something about this. Anchored in the ethic of Jesus, he wanted to unleash good in a tangible, gritty, concrete way. And so what he did is he established the first ever public hospital. The first ever public healthcare center that would take anybody and everybody that needed to be physically taken care of. And eventually it got to be so much momentum, it became known as the Basileus. It had 6 different departments. Among them was a department for the homeless. It was if you were an orphan, if you were a foundling. It's very common in the early centuries. If you didn't want a baby, then you would just leave it. And so they were called foundlings because Christians would go and they would find these babies and bring them in. The first ever public hospital of its kind was run by those who were trying to implement this ethic of Jesus, and from it launched multiple hospitals over what we know now as Eastern Europe. There was someone else, Fabiola. She was a believer. She became a believer later in her life, and she was very wealthy. She bankrolled other hospitals across what now is Western Europe. And these are the people that we can thank for the institution of medical care that we get to experience and often take for granted today. All because they started to ask this question: what is required of me to follow this ethic? What does this ethic require of me? Where is there a need? I'm going to follow in the way and unleash the good in Jesus, in his name. You see, you were born for this. You were born at this time for this reason. And Jesus, he knows your limitations, and he knows your passions, and he knows that there is a something that everyone possesses by which he has called you into purpose with this ethic. And so, do you ask the question for 2026? What might be my plan to live out this radical ethic in my following of Jesus? Where is he taking me? Where is he calling me to do such a radical thing? You know, Jesus himself died for you and me with this radical love, that we might know this love and know being content with his peace and his joy and his love because of his radical death means that we can experience the radical love of Christ. So now you're good. We're good. We're content. Now we're called to take what we've been given and leverage it for the transformation of the world. Maybe it creates a tension in you. Pay attention to that, because chances are this is where Christ is calling you to follow. Not in our way, but in the radical way of Christ. And when you do so, things will begin to flourish, because when we match our belief to our actions, flourishing follows. Let me pray for you, and then we're going to receive the blessing of this meal. Gracious Heavenly Father, your call to us is a high calling. We can't begin to admit that we can meet that bar consistently by our own will, by our own abilities. And so, Lord, it opens up a space of need within each of us. We need you to show up if we're going to be able to carry out this call. We can't do it on our own. Frankly, we're just not that good. But Lord, with you, we can. With you, we can set our own ways aside. We can set our fears aside. We can set our what-ifs aside. We can set the hopes that we think that we can gain so that we can follow through with your plan for our lives. Lord, will you begin to write again your story into our lives as we look ahead to this new year? Help us to form a picture of a year of transformation right around our world, because you show up. And when you show up, Lord, things always flourish. So we give you thanks in your name. Amen.